I can't believe we're talking about satiety and we haven't brought up protein yet. I think, the real simple way of looking at this is, hey, on a gram per gram basis, protein is the most satiating macronutrient. But it really depends on like how do you quantify that? Like how do you rate satiety? What do you bootstrap it to? So like, are we doing satiety per weight of food? Are we doing satiety per energy content? Because then if we're talking about satiety per energy content, I'm betting on fibrous vegetables, which are technically carbohydrates, every day of the week. A deck of cards of protein is going to be like, you know, 80, 150 calories, depending on the fat content of it. But if you get two full bowls of broccoli, that's a similar amount of calories, but it's two full bowls of broccoli, as an example. So I do think, and it's also one of those things, like you said, Brad, like that's something we're probably always tracking. That's one of those quote unquote sport supportive behaviors. Whether you're actually tracking grams of protein or whether each plate, when you're sitting down for a meal, one of those default diet segments, it's got a serving of protein on it. That's there. So I think a discussion of how protein is satiating is kind of not relevant to bodybuilders, in my opinion, because that's a box that everyone's ticked. We almost never have clients who are like, I just can't even get in 1.2 grams per kg of protein. It's most of the time it's like, hey, let's knock it down, like Steve said, to maybe the lowest optimal range, to maybe reduce your satiety a little bit. But most people who are on the 3DMJ rosters, most people who listen to this podcast, maybe unless they're vegans, which is, a little bit of another concern, are going to be walking around above what's optimal for muscle gain, at least, and probably closer to what's maximizing or in the range of maximizing satiety. So it's other stuff. So I don't want to discount the effect of protein. That's fantastic for people who don't have that habit in place. But that's probably one of the very first habits, at least I don't know if you guys both agree, that most folks interested in lifting weights do with their nutrition.
Yeah, I would agree. Right now, with the vegan and vegetarian diets being so popular, it's getting a box that gets checked off less frequently, and we got to kind of start thinking about them more and more. But we're quickly finding ways around that, to get to where vegetarians and vegans can get that protein. It's a little bit more effort. Sometimes it's a little bit more expensive, but we're getting there. But I think that a lot of those folks that kind of start thinking, oh, okay, I think I want to get into this weightlifting thing, and they're kind of traditional vegetarians. That's kind of one of the first things that is a red flag. When I'll see their application, and typically, one thing we haven't talked about yet is fiber too. A lot of these vegetarian and vegan diets are tremendously high in fiber. They're eating a lot of beans. And those are extremely satiating, And so these folks tend to just be on the leaner side. And I think that's kind of the reason, is that their fiber intake is so high from beans and tofu and things like that, that they can get away with eating a lot more voluminous food and not have all the calories that kind of come along with your traditional, kind of American diet.
Yeah, and there's data to support that. I think, that's another way of looking at this whole satiety of protein versus other things. If you look at vegetarians, they tend to have a lower protein intake than the general population by a significant proportion. However, they also have a lower body weight. And I'm not saying that that's causational. I can't drill that down to anything, but I think we have to realize that there's many things that impact satiety, and having a huge fiber content, a whole bunch of micronutrients, that also will impact it, and it will probably be collectively more so than the impact of not having the 30 grams of protein that the average person does, while they're also consuming hyper palatable foods and all this other stuff that tends to go away with vegetarian diets. So that's a really good point. I think there's an interesting perspective that I want to talk about, that I think we might be a good segue at this point to get to, since I think we've kind of covered off season and some ways to manipulate your satiety to make you feel like you can gain weight more easily.
Yeah, I'd say one more thing, just because I found it helpful, was like, and since we talk so much about your appetite, like this is what this is about, like letting, even if you're having a hard time gaining weight and you're in the off season, like still letting your appetite guide. Like you still have to have your structure, you still don't want to get behind the ball, but still letting your appetite guide your eating. So it's like, I don't know, it's like two things. Like one, like if you're naturally just not hungry in the morning, like back in the day, like I would force myself to eat in the morning, even though it would make me like sick just to get the calories in. Where now it's like, I'm not that hungry then. Let me just wait until my appetite naturally picks up. I just don't let that go on too long. So, and the second thing is like, and I don't know if you guys have found this as well, but like if it is helpful if I'm at like the upper end of my set point to like, to not have to necessarily force a big meal in the morning, like I was just saying, but to use like a smaller meal to like kickstart my appetite. So like I could go until 2 and not be hungry, but if I had like just something at like 11 maybe or whatever, like that will kind of get things moving faster. And I don't know if you guys have found that anecdotally of like, we're all different in the sense of like, but I've found that like sometimes it's helpful to like get a little meal in to kind of get my appetite rolling if I'm having a hard time.
Well, I would say that thousands of years of culinary knowledge would support that. That's why there's appetizers. On the menu. Yeah, I would totally agree with you. That certainly is a thing. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's some of those are going to be pretty individually. That's worth exploring, I should say. There's going to be some big individual differences there. A lot of that's going to be based on kind of the way you respond to different types of foods. But a great example for me, I think, while you're talking about this, I think of when I go out to eat Mexican food, whether or not there are chips and salsa at the table does not change the fact that I eat a whole burrito. You know what I'm saying? Like that burrito gets eaten because I came there. I'm going to eat that burrito. I like it. With the chips and salsa, it's just a great little like. It makes me excited about the burrito to come because it gives me a little bit of that saltiness, a little bit of that spice. But I want something more substantial. But if we were to look at the numbers, like. I ate a lot more calories because I had, a freaking basket of chips on top of it. So that's absolutely a thing. Kind of going back to this whole satiety rating thing to give people a little more understanding of what we're doing on the back end. So like, let's say we have this 1 to 10 satiety scale and 5 is not hungry, not full. This is kind of like when you're walking around on vacation, you could say, I could eat if someone brings up, getting like, gelato, but if you were at a 6 or a 7, you'd be like, no, I'll pass, right? And then, 4 or 3, you're actually getting reasonably hungry, you want to eat. If you're hanging out in like a 3 to 7 range most of the time, that is, I'm hungry to I'm satisfied, and you're not in a quote unquote obesogenic environment, that means you're probably going to be maintaining your weight so long as you're reasonably active and you tick all those other boxes we talked about. And what you can do is just simply upshift in that range 1 or 2 points to gain weight. You go from being from a 3 to a 7 to a 4 to an 8, and now you'll probably be in a smaller surplus. Or you can get to a 5 and a 9. That was kind of my rule, never be hungry. And that's what it took for me to get kind of into the upper ends of where my body starts not allowing me to feel hungry and not wanting me to keep gaining weight. And then so the combination of modifying the palatability of your diet and then accepting different levels of hunger or satiety is what we're manipulating. Because if I was to give you the same diet you would use 8 weeks out in terms of the food selection, but the appropriate calories, you would hit that 8 or 9 on the fullness scale before you were even in a big enough surplus. You try to eat like a bro. We know just how hard that is. We can all remember, not all of us, many of us can remember back in the day how that actually became a challenge. Brad, I'm specifically thinking of WNBF pro and all around great guy, Luis Burgos. When he first came to us and he was eating clean all the time. And this guy had a pretty revved up metabolism, quote unquote. I think he had to take in around 650 grams of carbs along with triple digit numbers of fat in the off season to gain weight. Similar size to me, I think, on stage. So for him to get up into around 100 kilos, around 220, 230 pounds in that range, he was really struggling. And he came to us with what looked like a GH gut. And then we found out his diet, and he basically had like 3 carb sources, and most of it was oats. So he'd walk around with like this big water bottle full of oats that he would work on the whole day. And I think we figured it out one time, and he was on like 150 grams of fiber every day. And I shit you not, once we got him just consuming Greek yogurt, and like some of the like Ben and Jerry Greek yogurts. Remember when those were back in the day? They had like a decent amount of protein in them, and they were much higher calories, and just cut down on his fiber and added some more palatable things. And all of a sudden, he was able to gain weight and lost his gut. It was crazy. So it was really interesting just to see like his intestinal hypertrophy, or rather I should say his intestinal atrophy, occur while he was actually able to gain overall body mass, literally from just asking it to not turn into a fiber crunching factory. So just one little anecdotal experience. I'm sure he would laugh and maybe be a little embarrassed with us sharing that, which makes me happy because I always like when Luis is embarrassed. So.